Hello and welcome to German Lessons with Mr. Ferguson. Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum Deutschunterricht mit Herrn Ferguson. Diese 9. grammatische Stunde, the 9th grammar lesson, ist die Wortstellung, word order. Before wir anfangen, please remember to like this video, bitte klickt Gefällt mir, and to subscribe to my channel, so that I can keep helping you with your German. Bitte vergesst nicht zu abonnieren. If you're enjoying my videos, please consider buying me a coffee by clicking the banner now. All contributions are gratefully received and allow me to continue to bring you new and exciting German content whilst keeping it free to access on YouTube. Thank you to those of you who've already contributed. It's very much appreciated. Vielen Dank. Teil 1. Coordinating conjunctions. In order to fully understand this lesson, it's important that you understand what a subject and a verb are. A verb is a doing word, an action. For example, run, jump, fly, swim, be, have, etc. And verbs can come in a number of different tenses. For example, I run, I ran, I will run. A subject is the person or thing who is doing the action. If you'd like more of an explanation, please go back to watch lesson 2 in this series by clicking here. To begin with, it's important to know what the standard word order in German is. The normal word order is subject, verb, everything else. For example, ich spiele Fußball. I play football. Wir gehen einkaufen. We go shopping. Meine Mutter isst Käse. My mother eats cheese. As you can see from the sentences above, there is a rule in German which I refer to as the verb second rule. This means that, as the default setting, the verb should be the second idea. It's important to recognise that this doesn't mean the second word. Let's use the last example above. The subject in the final example is meine Mutter, which, while it's 2 words, is only one idea. The second idea, therefore, is the verb isst, which means eats. This means that the word order is okay. This verb second rule will play a much bigger role in part 2 of this video. In German, like in English, we can link sentences together with words called connectives. These are words like and, or, but, because, etc. And these fall into a few categories. The first category, which we'll talk about here, is called coordinating conjunctions. This is a fancy way of saying there is no change to the word order. So with my classes, I refer to these as no-change words. The most common no-change words, or coordinating conjunctions in German, are und, which means and. For example, ich trinke Cola und ich esse Pizza. I drink Coke and I eat pizza. Oder, meaning or. For example, hört Musik oder tanzt. He listens to music or he dances. Aber, meaning but. For example, ich hasse Golf, aber ich liebe Tennis. I hate golf, but I love tennis. Sondern, meaning but rather. And this works with a negative statement as the first clause. For example, wir gehen nicht ins Kino, sondern wir sehen einen Film zu Hause. We're not going to the cinema, but, rather, we are watching a film at home. And denn, which is one of the words for because. For example, ich liebe Deutsch, denn es ist super. I love German because it is great. So, that's how basic word order in German works. It's a good idea to pause the video now to have another look over the default word order, subject, verb, everything else, and the coordinating conjunctions or no-change words that we've covered, and enjoy putting these into practice and extending your sentences. Teil 2. Inversion. In the first part of this video, you heard about the standard word order of subject, verb, everything else. And in this video, we'll be looking at the verb second rule in more detail, and a related rule which is called inversion. Look at the following English examples. I'm going on Monday, or on Monday, I'm going. Notice how, in English, we can put the time phrase, on Monday, in either place. If we start with it, we have to use a comma after it. In German, we have these two options as well. The first example would be Ich gehe am Montag. In the second example, however, instead of the comma, we will need to use inversion. Let me demonstrate. If we start with am Montag, this time phrase becomes the first idea. We know from the verb's second rule that we need to have the verb as the second idea. The word order will therefore become time phrase, verb, subject, everything else. So the phrase would therefore be Am Montag gehe ich. This rule is called inversion because the subject and the verb have been inverted or swapped. Let's look at another example in German. Sie spielen Fußball in Deutschland. They play football in Germany. However, if we start with the phrase in Germany, we will need inversion. In Deutschland spielen sie Fußball. In Germany, they play football. Almost all time phrases will cause inversion if used at the start of a sentence, with the exception of the word when, which will be discussed in part 3. Some common ones that are used to give a sense of an order of things are dann, meaning then. For example, wir essen, dann gehen wir zum Park. We are eating, then we're going to the park. Danach, meaning after that. For example, wir gehen zum Park, danach gehen wir schwimmen. We're going to the park. After that, we're going swimming. Davor, before that. For example, davor gingen wir zum Zoo. Before that, we went to the zoo. Später, meaning later. For example, später lese ich ein neues Buch. Later, I am reading a new book. Früher, meaning earlier. For example, früher ging ich zum Schloss. Earlier, I went to the castle. Morgens, meaning in the morning. For example, morgens esse ich Müsli. In the mornings, I eat muesli. The words nachmittags, in the afternoon, abends, in the evening, and nachts, at night, will work exactly the same way as morgens. Montags, meaning on Mondays. For example, montags arbeite ich immer. On Mondays, I always work. You can use the other days of the week here with an additional S, for example, Dienstags, Donnerstags, Samstags, for example, to change the meaning. Notice that these don't have a capital letter unless they start a sentence. As was the case with coordination, no change, there are some connectives which cause inversion if used at the start of a clause. Some common ones are jedoch, meaning however. For example, ich esse gern Pizza, jedoch ist es ungesund. I like eating pizza, however, it is unhealthy. Deshalb or deswegen, which mean therefore or for this reason. For example, ich bin müde, deshalb gehe ich nicht wandern. I'm tired, therefore or for this reason, I'm not going hiking. Or, mein Vater ist Vegetarier, deswegen isst er kein Fleisch. My father is a vegetarian, therefore he eats no meat. Außerdem, which means furthermore or on top of that. This is a nice way to strengthen an argument. So, ich mag ihn nicht, denn er ist gemein. Außerdem ist er unhöflich. I don't like him because he's mean. Notice the coordinating conjunction den, which is used here. And furthermore, he is impolite. Trotzdem, meaning despite this, in spite of this, or anyway. For example, er ist gemein. Trotzdem mag ich ihn. He's mean. Despite this, I like him. Or, I like him anyway. Stattdessen, instead of this. For example, ich bleibe nicht zu Hause. Stattdessen fahre ich Ski. I'm not staying at home. Instead, or instead of this, I'm going skiing. Finally, there is one situation where you'll see inversion, and that's asking questions. In English, we can use the words does or do for a question, such as, do you play tennis? Or, does she go to the cinema? In German, to form a question like this, there is no word for do or does, but instead you simply swap the subject and the verb. This means that, instead of the default subject, verb, everything else word order that we've talked about before, we would now have verb, subject, everything else. Here's an example. Du spielst Fußball. You play football. This is a statement and a fact. Hey, Steve, you play football. Can you explain the offside rule? To ask the question of, do you play football, we use inversion. Spielst du Fußball? So, that's how inversion works in German. It's a good idea to pause the video now to remind yourself of when and why to use inversion, the time phrases and the connectives that will cause it to happen when used at the start of a clause, and asking do or does type questions.
Teil 3. Subordinating conjunctions. In this final part of this lesson, we'll be learning about connectives called subordinating conjunctions.
I also refer to these as boot words, and I'll explain why. When using a subordinating conjunction or boot word, the verb that follows the connective will be sent to the end of the clause. I like to think of it as the subordinating conjunction putting on a pair of football boots and kicking the verb so hard that it flies to the end of the clause. Let's have a look in German at an example. Here are two basic sentences. Ich liebe Deutsch. I love German. Es ist super. It is great. Currently, I could link these sentences together using coordinating conjunctions or no change words, and nothing would happen to the word order. So, for example, Ich liebe Deutsch, denn es ist super. I love German because it's great. This is a perfectly accurate and acceptable sentence, but the word denn is not used in German anywhere near as often as its counterpart weil, which also means because. In speech, particularly, you'll hear weil a lot, so let's learn how to use it. Weil is a subordinating conjunction, or boot word, so when it's used, it will send the next verb to the end of its clause. In the sentence Ich liebe Deutsch, liebe, love, is the verb. It's the second idea, and nothing's affecting it, so that clause is absolutely fine. When I introduce weil, particularly to younger students, I tell them to call it weil, who is this evil creature who hates verbs, and is always looking towards the end of the clause. As soon as he sees a verb, he wants to kick it. So, to say because it is great, using weil and es ist super, we need to identify the verb. Hopefully, we know that ist is a verb, meaning is, but if not, we can look in the second position of the clause. Es is in the subject, so the first position, and ist is in the second position, so this has to be our verb. So, we say, weil, es, and then via weil will spot the verb ist and boot it to the end of the clause. So the clause will read, weil es super ist, because it super is, because it is super. Have a look at some more examples which will help to demonstrate this. Mein Vater ist müde. Schläft nicht. My father is tired. He doesn't sleep. Mein Vater ist müde, weil nicht schläft. My father is tired because he doesn't sleep. Meine Mutter mag Brot. Es ist lecker. My mother likes bread. It is tasty. Meine Mutter mag Brot, weil es lecker ist. My mother likes bread because it is tasty. Ich esse kein Fleisch. Ich bin Vegetarier. I eat no meat. I am a vegetarian. Ich esse kein Fleisch, weil ich Vegetarier bin. I eat no meat because I am vegetarian. In some sentences, there are more than one verb. In this case, you simply boot the first verb to the end, and everything else stays the same. For example, ich kann Deutsch lernen. I can learn German. Weil ich Deutsch lernen kann. Because I can learn German. Wir sind ins Kino gegangen. We went to the cinema. Weil wir ins Kino gegangen sind. Because we went to the cinema. There's a long list of subordinating conjunctions or boot words in German, But here are some of the most common ones. Obwohl, meaning although. For example, ich mag Deutsch, obwohl es schwierig ist. I like German, although it is difficult. Obgleich, which means even though, and is used in exactly the same way as obwohl above. Da, which means because or as, and this is an alternative to weil. For example, ich mag Deutsch, da es super ist. I like German as it's great. Das, meaning that, and this is used as a connective and is followed by a point to be made. For example, ich denke, dass wir gesund essen. I think that we eat healthily. Ich glaube, dass London cool ist. I believe that London is cool. Ob, meaning whether. For example, ich weiß nicht, ob ich zur Party gehe. I don't know whether I'm going to the party. So dass or damit, which means so that. For example, ich gehe in die Stadt, so dass ich ein Geschenk kaufen kann. I'm going to town so that I can buy a present. Or ich lerne Deutsch, damit ich einen Job in Deutschland finden kann. I'm learning German so that I can find a job in Germany. Als ob, meaning as if. For example, spricht, als ob alles weiß. He speaks as if he knows everything. Nachdem, meaning after, and this is separate to the word nach, which is used with nouns. For example, wir gehen nach Hause, nachdem wir in den Park gehen. We are going home after we go to the park. Bevor, meaning before. For example, ich laufe, bevor ich schwimmen gehe. I run before I go swimming. Während, meaning while. For example, ich koche Abendessen, während sie Hausaufgaben macht. I am cooking dinner while she is doing homework. Bis, meaning until. For example, ich werde Klavier üben, bis ich gut spielen kann. I will practice the piano until I can play well. Wenn, meaning if or when, and this means when if it's used with the present or the future tense, and if it's used with the conditional tense. For example, ich bin müde, wenn ich den ganzen Tag arbeite. I am tired when I work all day. Or, ich werde auf die Uni gehen, wenn ich älter bin. I will go to uni when I'm older. And finally, als, which means when, but this means when if it's used in the past tense, and you need to think of it as meaning back when. For example, ich habe die Geige gespielt, als ich jung war. I played the violin when I was young, or back when I was young. The final part of word order that needs discussing is a rule called verb, verb. This happens when you start a sentence with a subordinating conjunction and need to follow that sentence with another point. Here's an example in English. Although I like German, I find it difficult. In German, the first clause would be obwohl ich Deutsch mag, and as you can see, this clause ends with a verb and a comma. The next clause, therefore, has to be inverted so that it starts with a verb. In this example, the second clause would be finde ich es schwierig. Here's one more example. Weil ich Vegetarier bin, esse ich kein Fleisch. Because I'm a vegetarian, I eat no meat. It's worth noting that in this above example, you could not use the coordinating conjunction or no change word denn instead of weil. They are completely interchangeable in all other scenarios, but you cannot start a sentence with the word denn. So, that's how subordinating conjunctions or boot words work in German. This is definitely the most difficult word order rule, and it's a very good idea to pause this video now to recap the rules and have another look at the examples. I will provide a list of the subordinating conjunctions used in this video and put that in the description. Try to get used to using these in speech and in writing, as getting the word order right will make you sound native in no time. Habe ich etwas vergessen? If you're a native German speaker and think I've forgotten something important about subordination and word order rules in German, please write a comment below. Bitte schreibt einen Kommentar. Also, please remember to click subscribe to receive all of my German lesson videos, language learning tips and updates. You can also follow me on Instagram with the username Herr Ferguson and on Twitter under @Herr Ferguson. Otherwise, from me, it's Danke und auf Wiedersehen.